Welcome to the Blue Heart Podcast. I'm your host and conversational guide, Lieutenant Joe Pangaro. This podcast is for you, the men and women of law enforcement, because ours is a noble profession, worthy of your heart, your passion, and your life. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. You know that I do a lot of writing, right? You know, I've written books on police work and police training and all that kind of stuff. I've had some interest in the story from my most recent book that just came out called The Investigation. The Investigation is a different way to teach police techniques. My first book, The Interview, was really a straightforward, here's how to conduct a criminal interview. Here's the psychological components you need to have. You need to understand about yourself, the person you're going to interview, all those kind of things. And it was kind of straightforward. Do A, B, C, and D. Here's the techniques I recommend. Here's a couple of stories that go with the techniques so you know how to use them. And it's done pretty well. And then they wanted me to do a second book, and I said, I do something different. You know, everything in life, if you're a creative person, you have to be a differentiator. You know, you can't write a movie about a kid who accidentally goes back to 1955. That's already been done. So you'd have to think of another way to do a time travel kind of a movie. So in my book, The Investigation, from blue360media.com, I took the story of a brutal double homicide, and I used that as the backdrop for the police training. And it came out really well, but I've had some interest from a couple of production companies that have said, hey, we read the story, we like the story, we might like to turn it into a screenplay, which I said, well, guess what? I'm already doing that. So I have the book in front of me here. And it's got all the stuff you need to know about conducting an investigation. It's a very serious book, but it does use the story to move the learning along so that you're more caught up in what's going on. All right, so I'm going to go here. And one of the things, the reason I'm connecting this together, I'm going to connect this together for you here, is that recently we saw in Long Island, there was a serial killer captured. And when I talk about these kind of people, these are not, somebody who steals a car, somebody who's shoplifting, even somebody, an idiot in a bar fight. People like serial killers have a different drive system. And I recognized this early on in my career, as that when I was investigating different kinds of crimes, and I investigated some very serious crimes, including the story in my book, the double homicide in my book, that I use as the backdrop. But I've investigated serial rapists, serial burglars, all these people that do things over and over and over again, and you start to learn their patterns, because we all have patterns, right? So all the time I talk about patterns. I say we all have patterns in life. When you get up in the morning, you probably have some kind of pattern that you follow. Do you go to the bathroom first? Do you make the coffee? Do you let out the dog? Do you sit in the backyard for 10 minutes? What is it that you do? We all have these patterns, and we follow them over and over. So when we look at, like in police work, we try and teach our officers to do random patrols of their neighborhoods, of their business sections. The reason being is that we're so pattern-based that we can slip into doing the exact same kind of patrol every single day. On day shift, I go from here to there to there to there. On midnights, I go from here to, you know what I mean? And when you set up a pattern, people can identify it and recognize it. Now, when you're at home in bed sleeping, you don't care one bit about the pattern of patrol of the police officer that's riding past your house. But if you were a criminal, you might want to know how the officers patrol so you could plot out your crimes, right? Wouldn't that be a good idea? So what I identified in here, in this book, and I'm looking at page 10 of The Investigation, and there's some definitions. I give a lot of definitions because you have to understand things. And I talk about pattern-based behavior. Now, I normally don't like when a host reads from a book, but this is very interesting. So I'm going to read something here. There are need-based crimes and drive-based crimes, right? Or you can call them want-based crimes. You want something, or a drive. No matter the type of criminal or crime we're investigating, most crimes can be defined as either based on a drive or a want. Defining the crime can help us as we approach to investigate the crime and understand what techniques to use. Now, doesn't it make sense? If I am dealing with a petty thief, and they commit constant thief, they go up on your porch and they steal the hot pie off your porch, right? Remember that from when you were a kid? The old lady puts the pie on the window and somebody steals the pie, right? If that's what I'm dealing with, then I need to understand as much as I can about that person. What's their pattern? Because it'll help me to try and catch them, right? So when I was out there active duty, my partner Chuck, this guy was a brilliant guy, and we would have these groups of serial burglaries, people that would come and break into people's houses, and they would hit multiple houses in the course of a couple of weeks, and they hit a couple towns, they move around. And I remember we were sitting around trying to figure out, okay, let's take out all the cases. Let's look at all of the different locations that were burglarized, the time of day, what was taken, how was it taken. A lot of burglars will go to your house and they'll take a pillowcase off your bed and fill it with the stuff they steal of you, or so they can carry it, and away they go. Some burglars climb through windows. Some burglars like to, push in or kick in your door. Other burglars like go through a basement window. There's a whole host of different ways that burglars behave. But the reality is, like any other kind of criminal that's a serial-based kind of criminal, they do the same things over and over once they find a pattern that works for them. So that's really understanding why we're, as a pattern-based person. Same thing for you. If you knew, say, okay, put it in your perspective. Say there's a person that you don't get along with, and every time you see this person at the local food store, they confront you, and they give you a hard time, and they create uncomfortable feelings, and maybe they're a little threatening. And you start to realize that every time you go to that food store at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, that person is there. So then you try going at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday, and they're not there. Then you try 4 o'clock on a Friday, and they're not there. Then you test. You go back on Thursday at 2 o'clock, and there they are, and they give you a hard time. You have now understood this person's pattern and what the confrontation may be, so you avoid the pattern. Well, police work is the exact opposite. We want to know the pattern so that we can go out and see maybe the crime in progress and take some action. So if you reported this person harassing you, and I would ask you, well, when does this happen? You say, I've noticed that every Thursday, if I go there at 2 o'clock, this person is there and gives me a hard time. Then I'd say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out there at Thursday at 2 o'clock, and I'm going to conduct a surveillance on the parking lot. So if you're willing, why don't you show up like you're going to shop and see what happens? If this person's there, if they cause a problem, I'll be able to see it. And then they go out there, and of course you get out of the car, and the person sees you, approaches you, starts a hard time, gives you a hard time, and now the officer can step out and say, hey, what are you doing? You're harassing that person, make an arrest, whatever they can do. So that's the purpose of understanding patterns in people's behavior. So once we understand the concept of patterns, now we can look at everything else in the world. And I'm going to get to the book. I'm going to get back to the book in a minute. But right now, when we look at people's patterns, say a drug addict, someone who uses drugs every single day. We used to say that, heroin was a morning drug, early in the morning, because people would use the drug all day and then they pass out when they wake up in the morning. They need, the fix. We used to hear that. They need a fix. They need to fix their feeling sick because they get sick to their stomach without the drug or whatever. So they'd be out early in the morning prowling around looking for heroin because they wake up and they need the drug. So our narcotics task force, we used to go out at 5:30 in the morning and start surveilling areas that we knew where there was open air drug dealing, where people would show up to buy drugs. And there's usually not a lot of people around at that time in the morning other than drug dealers and people going to work, but people that would frequent these areas and stop and talk to somebody we knew was a drug dealer. And we would sit and we would watch, and lo and behold, here comes all these people between 6 and 6:30, and we would stop people, get the drugs, and make the arrest because we knew their patterns, right? Let's look at the cocaine in the White House. So the first thing that I got to tell you, I'm frustrated that they couldn't solve this kind of thing. When at first they tell you it's in one part of the White House, then it's in another part of the White House, then they don't know. Then now there's camera spots in the White House, they tell us now, that you can't see anything. Or maybe the camera wasn't working. This is dangerous. This is our White House. You might not like Joe Biden. You might disagree with his policies. He is the president of the United States, and we have to protect him every single day. to make sure the enemies of America cannot hurt him. He is the President of the United States. He should be cared for and constantly secured. So if there are spots in the White House where the cameras don't cover it, we better fix those spots, or we better find out that they're lying because they didn't want to actually tell us who had the cocaine. Now, there's an old saying, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it is probably a duck. So I've said this on previous episodes. Is it possible that someone else there had cocaine? Of course it is. It is a drug that's used by lots of people recreationally. Now, we initially were told that they found the coke in a locker. Then I heard it on the radio, and I heard it reported that it was just under an ounce of cocaine, not much. Well, let me tell you something. An ounce of cocaine is a lot of cocaine. Okay? Now it turns out they're saying it's just less than a gram. So a gram, if you think, look for a gram of cocaine, if you don't know what cocaine is, if you took like a lunch baggie, right, and you poured sugar in there, and you had it about, I don't know, you pour it in, so it's into the corner, right? It's into the corner of the bag, and about a half inch up and down. Now you twist the bag and you pull that off. That's about a gram of cocaine. So that it's really not a lot. That speaks to me of recreational use. If it was an ounce, I would say, wow, that's something they really have to investigate. But the fact that they're telling us that they couldn't determine whose this was, I have to call out as BS, because it's in the White House. You know that there's all kinds of surveillance there. So this nonsense about there's areas you can't see and this and that, that's nonsense. That whole place can be seen. So I would say we have to go to whose pattern would that be? And that's why, of course, everybody's immediately jumping to, well, it has to be, what's his name? Hunter. Because Hunter has a history. It's not because we know for sure it's him, but we're looking at the facts. We're discerning the facts. Who would have cocaine in the White House? Well, we don't think there's any drug dealers walking around through the White House just throwing bags of cocaine like the cocaine fairy, right? It would have to be somebody who is using it recreationally or somebody who is using it addictively. And sometimes it's both. So we got a story from the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, right? She told us the Bidens were not here Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and it was found on Friday. Well, there's two nonsenses there. First of all, just because it was found on Friday doesn't mean it was left there when they weren't there. Could have been left there the night before, the day before, whatever. The next thing we find out is the position, the location of it changes. See, so you notice this is also a pattern. You notice this White House has a pattern where they tell you one story. When facts come up to debunk that, they change the story. That's their pattern. So you can't believe anything that comes out of there the first time. You have to give it some time, right, to let the facts settle and see how much of in a corner they're going to be put before they tell the true story. So in this case, the Bidens were not there. They were all gone. And then we find out now, based on the logs and the records, the president's movements are monitored so they know where he is at all times. The president and his son Hunter were in the White House until, I think, 6:48 p.m. on Friday. So they were there all day Friday, which is, again, we look at patterns, and that helps us to understand people's behavior. So when we're going to talk in a little bit about body language. So when you're watching things on TV, I'm going to give you some clues of what to look for when you're watching people speak and you're watching people make statements or come out and say things. There's some body language things and some wordage that you can look at that you need to say, oh, wait a minute, that looks bad to me. So let me get back here. Need, want crimes, and drive crimes. All right, so a need crime is something we can all identify with. We need food, we need water, we need shelter, security, love, and connection to others. Those are the basic drives that people have, right? We have drives to do that. These are the base needs built into us as a species so we can survive and function. Maslow's hierarchy of need identifies those things as a starting point and a motivation for all human activity. Right, so think about that. In the 1910s and the 1920s, we didn't have TV, we didn't have internet, we didn't have all these other things. What were most people, not the Rockefellers and the Gottrocks and all those people, what were most people in America in the 1910s and 20s worried about? They were worried about putting food on the table, making sure they had a house to live in, and that they weren't victimized by crime. So if you take any one of those legs out of that stool, if I don't have enough food, then I'm going to concentrate on getting food. I'm not going to concentrate on making music, writing plays, painting, sculpture, all the higher kind of thinking that human beings are capable. We can't do that if we don't have food. If we don't have shelter, you're not going to be doing those things. And if you don't have security, if you're worried about people coming through the door every minute, it's going to be very hard for you to do those higher end things. So when we look at this, those kind of drives are one thing. Then there's the other kind of drives. Now this is just a sprinkling from the book. I'm not going to sit and read the whole thing to you, but when you see the difference here, those are wants. So if I want electronics, if I want a PlayStation, if I want some jewelry for my wife, if I want a nicer car, and I don't have the ability, I don't have the resources to get those things, depending on my personality, I may decide that I will steal those things that I want. I want them. And some people can fall prey to that. I need the drugs. So therefore, I'll do a burglary to get money so I can go buy the drug. Needs and wants, right? They kind of go together. But what happens when we realize that the potential consequences to us for satisfying a want are very high, we often back off. Yeah, I want nice jewelry, but when I realize if I break into my neighbor's house, they have cameras, they might see me, then I go to jail. So while I want it, I can control it. So when in a want type of a situation, normally we can feel compelled to satisfy our want. But in reality, if the consequences are high, the risk to reward is too much in the negative for us, we will forego the want. We say, okay, forget it. I'm not going to do it. No matter what, I don't want to get in that kind of trouble. On the other hand, a drive crime, or these other drives we have, if you were starving and your children were starving, you would probably go out and steal, no matter the consequences, because you would need to eat. You're going to die if you don't eat. So you would do things. It would drive you really hard. It would be constantly on your mind, something you couldn't stop thinking about. Well, another drive that we all have is the sex drive. Right? The sex drive is built into us for a specific reason. It's built in so that we continue the species. Right? We have these hormones in our body that make us attracted to other people, that make us feel like engaging in sexual activity. Our very bodies are built to attract the opposite sex, so that we will get together and mate. Now that's the basic 1, 2, 3 of the whole thing. And it's not so you can have fun. It is so that you can continue the species. That's built into all animals, everything. That sex drive. Well, the problem we have with crimes is that some people have this drive, and sex as a drive can be perverted and can be twisted in many individuals, where they don't just try to satisfy that drive or realize that, yeah, I really, really want to go and have a sexual relationship with my neighbor because I find her very attractive. But it's not destroying me. The drive is there. The need to mate, to procreate is there. And I do find her attractive. But if I do that, then I'm going to have a big problem with my wife. I'm going to have a problem with her husband. I might get in trouble. So I can close that out. When the drive is twisted, like it is with serial killers, psychosexual killers, these are people that derive pleasure, sexual pleasure and otherwise, out of a victim's pain, out of a victim's suffering. Now, you might sit there and say, how can that possibly be? Because you could never imagine that. But the reality is, it's true. Some people, you look at all the things that are out there. Okay, look at all the things that are out there. When I teach police officers about criminal investigation when it comes to sexual assault, one of the things we talk about are these different drives and different proclivities that people will have. Now, this is not a sex talk, everyone, so if there's any kids in the room, they can get out. But what I'm saying is that we all like something different. We all find different things attractive, don't we? We do. So some people might say, oh, I like a big muscular man. I think that's very, very attractive to a woman. You might look at a woman and say, oh, I like a woman with some curves. I like her to, have a couple of pounds on her. You might like a really skinny woman, whatever. We all have these different likes. But then there's individual things within that paradigm. It was a football coach, famous football coach, going back, had to be 15, 20 years. And this guy, his proclivity was that he found women's feet very attractive. And he used to, and part to keep the kids out, he used to like to suck on his wife's toes, right? That's what he did. And that came out in the news media. Everybody laughed and joked about it, but I'm going to tell you, there are lots and lots and lots of people that have that same fetish, right? Fetishism is part of the drive, things that make you crazy. So in the course of my career, I investigated, one of my first big investigations ever was a man who sexually assaulted 70 and 80-year-old women. Now, you say to yourself, well, I really don't understand it, either do I, but you find out there is a huge population of people. Just like there are pedophiles that are attracted to young people, there are also lots of reasons why people want to sexually assault, not have sex with, sexually assault older people. And it's funny because we have to understand that sexual assault, though a lot of us think it's about sex, it's not. It's about power over the victim, right? And this is where you start to blend the psychosexual killers, these serial killers, like the guy in Gilgo Beach. You start to understand that it's not about having sex with the prostitute because the man just felt like he needed to have sex, but then he murdered the woman, right? He killed her. How much more control can you have over a person than to violate their body physically against their will and then to take their life? Do you see? This is a drive that doesn't affect me. I don't sit there and think about doing that, but I've investigated people who do. And it is really a sick group of people. But that's the difference between a drive. A drive pushes you, and when the drive is twisted, it can really cause havoc and pain. So a drive crime is one you can't really control. And when we look at this killer in Gilgo Beach, and we look at any of these other famous serial killers, almost all of them had a psychosexual component to them. They took their victims, they terrorized their victims, they sexually assault their victims. And another thing that's true with many serial psychosexual killers is that they will often take a souvenir from the victim. Now, if you've been listening on the mainstream media knows when they're talking about the Gilgo killer, they're saying that they're now searching the house looking for trophies, and that's what we call it in the business. They're taking trophies from their victims. And the reason they do that is that drive is so overwhelming and powerful to assault someone, to hurt them, terrorize them, and then take their life while engaging in sex with the person, to totally control them, is that they will take a personal thing from the victim and they will keep it. Sometimes they take underwear. Sometimes they take a driver's license. Sometimes they take some hair, a piece of jewelry, a necklace, a shoe. They take something personal from the victim. And after they dump the body, then they go back to that item once in a while, and they will relive the crime in their mind. They will relive the excitement of grabbing someone and controlling them. Then they will relive the excitement of the whatever they did to the people, whether they tortured them or whatever, or they made them in terror, and they will look at that item and touch that item, and it reminds them directly of that crime, and that satiates some of the need. At some point, though, doing that is not enough, and that drive forces them to go out and get another victim. And this is where we have the serial component to this. So while a serial burglar is not hurting people, they are acting in the same way. They have a pattern. Well, our serial killers have patterns also. And these sometimes are the things that help us to catch them, to identify them. The advent of DNA now is very, very important because it's very hard, no matter what you do, to not leave DNA everywhere you go. There's a saying in criminal investigation, when you go into a scene and when you come out, you leave things when you go in and you take things when you come out. That's why cops wear booties and all kinds of things when they go in and out of these places. So that's really, I wanted to talk about that because this is in the news now. And we're going to hear more about serial killers because this is going to be a bigger case as it goes, because there's many more victims that have not been tied to the killer yet. And we'll see how that goes in the future. But here, Lieutenant Joe, I just wanted to make you aware of these things so that you have a little better understanding. When we come back, we'll talk about how we can identify someone who's being truthful or deceptive. Lieutenant Joe and the Blue Heart Podcast Network would like to thank our sponsors. Blue 360 Media. You can find them at www.blue360media.com. and Medical Essential Diagnostics. You can find them at www.med-nj.com. We would also like to thank the Blue Heart Network production team, led by Senior Executive Director Todd Pangaro. Be careful out there. Do what's right.